Have you ever wondered if a condition you have today could actually be connected to one of your existing VA service connected disabilities? Because there's a type of claim called secondary service connected claims, and it could potentially open the door to additional VA disability compensation. In today's video, we're talking about a secondary condition that can be rated at 30% minimum, or actually 30%, 10%, 50, 70, and 100, but as the title says, this is one that could very commonly make 30%. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something very clear. When I say a secondary condition can be rated at 30%, I'm talking about the rating assigned to that particular condition. That does not necessarily mean your overall VA combined rating is simply going to increase by 30 percentage points. The VA uses a combined ratings calculation, so the actual impact depends on your existing ratings and the rating assigned to the new condition. Now, that's essentially VA math. It's something that you should know about as you're going through this journey, but I'm not going to dive deep into VA math today. But here's why I think secondary conditions are so important for veterans to understand. You may already have a service-connected disability, and that disability may have caused or aggravated another condition over time. And if that relationship can be established, that second condition may potentially be service-connected as secondary to the condition you already have. So in this video, I'm going to break down what a secondary condition actually is, what you need to have to establish one, and where that 30% comes into play. And probably one of the biggest questions that you'll have is, do you actually need a Nexus letter? Because you may have heard that you absolutely need to pay a doctor for a Nexus letter if you're filing a secondary claim. And that's simply not something you should automatically assume. Sometimes additional medical evidence can be very helpful, but you don't necessarily need a Nexus letter for every single secondary claim. And you don't necessarily need to pay someone to get one. So we're going to talk about all of that, including what I would look at before spending a single dollar on a Nexus letter. All right, let's get into it. All right, so what exactly is a secondary condition? I want to explain this in simple terms. A secondary service-connected claim is essentially a claim for a new disability that is linked to a disability the VA has already recognized as service-connected. Okay? The VA itself gives examples such as a service-connected knee injury leading to arthritis in the hip, which could get you a rating for whatever the hip condition might be. Also, another example is service-connected hypertension, leading to heart disease. The important concept that I want you to think about here is that condition A, it's something that's already service-connected. It's something the VA already recognizes as a service-connected condition, and condition B is a separate condition. You are saying that condition B is related to condition A. And that relationship can involve the existing condition causing the new condition, or depending on the circumstances, aggravating it. The fact that you have two conditions doesn't automatically make the second one secondary. You need evidence to support the relationship between them, and that's the important part. So the VA, currently says evidence for a secondary claim needs to establish that you have the new condition and that there's a link between them, or between it and the disability that's already service connected. So where does the 30% come from that I'm talking about? And really, this can be 30, this can be 10, this can be 20, this can be 50. But for the purposes of today's video, where does the 30% come from? The claim that I'm picking, or the condition that I'm picking for this video, is mental health. And why am I picking mental health? I think mental health is a very common condition that vets get that would end up being secondarily caused by something else. Mental health claims are great to talk about here because a lot of vets have them. And, a 30% rating is pretty common. Now, with that being said, that doesn't mean that, if you have the condition, it doesn't automatically mean you get a 30% rating. And if it's a secondary relationship, that doesn't automatically mean 30% either. The VA is going to evaluate mental health in any secondary condition based on the severity of the condition under the applicable rating criteria. And the applicable rating criteria can really be found on the internet. If you Google 38 CFR, which is the coded federal regulation that covers all VA ratings, and you add whatever condition you're looking for. In our case, we're going to add mental health. Then the VA has the criteria in there to help you figure out what your condition will be rated at based on your symptoms. So that's important. So just I'm just going to emphasize this again: a 30% rating for that secondary condition, in this case mental health, does not automatically mean that you're going to get 30% more added to your combined rating. That's where VA math comes in. So for example, if someone has an existing combined rating and receives another 30% evaluation, the VA doesn't simply take the old number and add 30. The VA uses its own combined ratings methodology. All right, so now that you know that there is a rating out there, or there is a condition out there that is commonly rated at 30%, and a lot of veterans get 30% for that, and a lot of veterans can connect something that they already have to that. Let's talk about what some common conditions are that could lead to mental health, and just kind of talk about it a little bit. So really, if you think about it, a lot of veterans have orthopedic conditions, and if you have an orthopedic condition and maybe it limits you from doing certain things, maybe it bothers you, maybe it gives you a depressed mood, that's kind of where we're talking about with mental health claims. And that's really how a lot of these end up being connected. But it could be more than just orthopedic conditions. Maybe you have really bad migraines, and it puts you out for a while, and it depresses you, and it gives you a lot of anxiety. That can be a condition that can lead to mental health as a secondary condition. What about even sinusitis, right? Having constant sinus problems can certainly lead to that. And there's a whole host of other conditions that can lead to mental health conditions. So it's really just a matter of understanding what the condition is that you have, how it impacts you, and whether or not a medical professional agrees with your assessment of that. So now that we've covered that, let's go in and talk about what you actually need for a secondary claim, because this is really important, and there's essentially 3 parts, and it's almost similar to a direct service connected claim, but it's a little bit different. So number 1, you need a current condition. Okay, you need a condition that you currently have. So if we're doing mental health, you got to have a diagnosis for that. So you got to ask yourself, do you actually have the condition? Has it been diagnosed by a medical professional, someone who's authorized to diagnose a mental health or whatever the condition is? And then very important, is there medical evidence documenting it? What do you have to show that you do have this condition? And then the next thing you need, part 2, you need an existing service-connected condition. So, what disability do you already have that's already service-connected that leads to that caused that other condition? What is your VA decision letter? Did they give you a condition? Did they already service connect whatever condition is that we're talking about here? And then what exactly is your current service-connected diagnosis? Is it migraines? Is it, arthritis in your knees? What is it? That's your existing service-connected condition. And then when you have those 2 things, when you have the current condition that's not connected and you have the existing service-connected condition, now you need to answer the connection. This is the big one. How do you know? How can you prove that that one condition caused another or aggravated another? Because that's really what the VA is going to be looking for here after you answer those other 2 questions. They're going to be looking for, and you need to ask yourself, what evidence do I have that supports that there's a relationship between the 2 conditions? All right, so some things that I'm going to talk about that will help you with this is medical records. All right, so and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, but you need to have some sort of medical opinion or some sort of medical evidence that shows that condition A was caused by condition B to the standard of at least as likely as not. And you could get that from your own personal doctor. If it's accurate, right? These are great questions to talk to your private medical doctor about. Like, hey, like, what are the chances that this caused that? Or what did cause this? Why am I experiencing these migraine headaches? Or why do I have a depressed mood all the time? Other things that are going to help you is like treatment history. Obviously you want to have treatment history to show that you are being treated for this, and that will also help the VA determine what your actual rating should be. Medical opinions, I talked a little bit about that, but you do want to have this conversation with your doctor, and you want your doctor to document what they think is, what their opinion is of that. You can include medical literature when it's relevant. If you want to do some research and throw studies in there, it might help you. But just keep in mind that every veteran's different, and therefore every relationship between two conditions on a veteran could be different. What I have as a secondary to something might be completely different in your body. So that's why medical literature, I think it's good. I think it shows that it's possible, but I don't necessarily think that it's a medical opinion for you all the time. And you want to have any relevant history. Lay evidence or personal statements, I think, are going to be important in this, especially for getting the right rating. But you definitely need to have some things to show what the connection is. And that's really important, really for any condition, but secondary or conditions, that's going to be important for those types of complex claims. All right, so that begs the next question. Do you really need a Nexus letter? A Nexus letter essentially is a medical opinion that addresses the relationship between two conditions. It can potentially be useful when the medical condition or connection isn't already adequately established by the evidence. But just keep in mind, you do not automatically need a Nexus letter. You may already have a lot of the evidence you need in your medical records already. Okay, so don't let someone convince you that every secondary claim is going to require you to go out and pay for a Nexus letter. Take a look at, we just went over kind of a self-assessment on whether or not you would have a condition that is connected to a service connected. We did a self-assessment just now. Look at the evidence that you came up with during that self-assessment to determine if you already have it. If you have medical evidence that's addressing the relationship, or maybe you went out and talked to your doctor about the relationship and your doctor, gave their professional opinion and they documented it, that might be all you need, okay? Medical records, medical opinions, are usually going to be used to support the link, but that doesn't mean that you need to go out and pay for a Nexus letter. Now, there might be some times when it makes sense, and in those times really are going to be dependent on how comfortable you feel. I would highly suggest building a relationship with a VSO that you can bounce ideas off of. After all, those Nexus letters can cost $1,000, but I can tell you that if you do need one, it could really pay off at the end. But if you don't need one, there's no sense in getting one. But when you have a condition that that maybe the relationship isn't clearly documented, that might be a time where you may decide you need it, or maybe existing records don't adequately explain the connection. That might be a time where you say to yourself, like, I don't have it. Or maybe you submitted it with what you thought would work and the VA did not agree with you and they gave you denial. Maybe then will be a time to go back and talk to your personal doctor, or even one of these paid for services, and getting an opinion that might strengthen your claim. Okay, just keep in mind that a Nexus letter, it's a tool, but it's not a magic piece. It's not like a magical piece of paper that's going to approve a secondary condition is connected to something that's already out there. And just keep in mind that let's try the things that might already be in your medical evidence already, so that you can do that. All right, so here's some things that I would do before going out and paying for a Nexus letter, just to give you kind of a an idea of like my thought process on this. Number one, I would go back and read your VA decision letter if you already submitted one and you want to appeal it. But I would also go back and just make sure you read your decision letter to confirm that the condition you want to connect it to is in fact already service connected. The next thing I would do is I would identify the secondary condition. I would make sure you're dealing with an actual diagnosed condition rather than simply, a symptom that you want to claim. I would review your medical records and look for your diagnosis, look for treatment history, look for references to the primary condition or things that make sense to you indicating that the primary condition caused it. And then, I would ask your own private doctor, like, what caused this or what aggravated this? Like, is it possible that that this played a role in it? And of course, if you ask your doctor that, they're going to document it for you. And then, I would in my own mind, I would look for the connection. I would say to myself, where is the evidence that explains why these two conditions are related? Okay. That's, if you can't find that, the VA rater and the C&P examiner, they're going to have a hard time approving your claim. Okay. And then you can decide whether you want to submit your claim as is, and see what happens, or whether or not you need additional medical evidence to, that would be necessary for the secondary claim. And in this case, this might be one of those times where you decide, okay, I'm going to go talk to, one of these medical professionals that talk about doing this. Maybe they have experience doing this, former C&P examiners, that might make sense at that point. All right. If you're looking into a secondary condition and you're trying to figure out whether getting a medical opinion or a Nexus letter might make sense for your situation, I did create a resource that might help. I've been in your shoes, so I kind of understand how hard it is to find medical professionals out there that do this. So I created informveteran.com. It's a free website. It has a directory there on informveteran.com of medical professionals who offer Nexus letter writing services and also independent medical opinions. So like if you're looking to do an increase and you need help, you can use this as a starting point to research potential providers. But there's also other places you can go. You can Google Nexus letters. You can go on Facebook groups. They're all out there. They all advertise all over the place. My directory is free for you. It's free for the medical professionals. I try to find them and I put them on there. But one thing I want to make very clear is I'm not saying that you're going to need to pay for a Nexus letter or even need a Nexus letter. You don't always need one and you don't always need to pay for one. So before spending any money, do your own due diligence. Look at your medical records, understand your claim, determine whether additional medical evidence is actually something you need. And also, just for the record, I don't endorse or guarantee any of the providers listed in the directory. The directory is a simple resource to help you find and research potential medical professionals. Please, you're responsible for doing your own research and deciding whether a particular doctor or NP or is right for you. I'll put a link to the website down in the description down below.